Hi all, my name is Mirela and I'm hosting another thought-provoking conversation. Today I'm speaking with Edwin. Uh,
Wow.
s- Hi, I'm really happy that we found the time to record this because we already had many different conversation, and I would like to invite you to say something about yourself so people who are listening this could know about you, what you do, what you like, and that kind of things.
Okay. Well, my name is Edwin Illoh. I'm a filmmaker to a lot of degree. Um, I would say I'm a storyteller. I've done a couple of shorts, and I think that's about as much as I could say about myself until direct questions are asked.
When I was preparing for our conversation, I was reading about your official biography.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was really curious about this thing that said his latest project is connecting the storyteller in every aspect of production in interactive storytelling. I was curious, what does it mean? Like, how do you explain this interactive storytelling? And can you say a little bit more about that?
Um, I had an idea that I think that was a project that I was working on and still in the process of actually sort of putting together. I think it would be a lot more complicated than I actually anticipated it to be. But it's about I wanted to start a story and in a way find a way to involve people, storytellers like myself, into the story and tell a whole story. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I find it as interactive as not just me telling a story, but everyone has a perspective in um, a certain character. But I will sort of start the beginning of the story and involve other writers and other storytellers to continue the story with me. Then at some point we will all arrive to uh, a resolution of the story, but I don't know how it's going to end. I think as the originator of the story, I will know how it's going to begin, but I don't know what characters are going to suddenly pop up in the stories. In the story. Um, I don't know how the second act of the story will be, but I only know the opening scene and how to begin the story. So it's sort of interactive in that way.
Mhm. And when you say that other writers would be involved in this, how do you uh, how do you want to do that? Is it only for writers, or do you think that other people who are not that kind of profession could be involved in this interaction?
I think that's one of the misconceptions about filmmakers actually, and in creators in general. I'm one to believe that everyone is a creator in their own way. Everyone knows how to tell a story. If you were a kid at some point, you've used toys and baby dolls to tell a story in some form or the other. So even the cinematographer on a set has a perspective when it comes to a story. The wardrobe designer, the art director, everyone has their own take on how they want a character to go. But it just so be it that it's the director that has a control over most things, and in a way the writer as well. But I think this project is a way to sort of open the field up to anybody that has some sort of sense of creativity or sense of adventure, or has an idea on what they think how a story should go. You just never know where you're going to get great idea from. It might be from the intern that is just right there in the shadows. but he has a beautiful take on how a character should develop and things like that. So it's definitely not just for writers or storytellers. It's for everybody that has an idea on how the story should continue. Obviously, there's going to be some sort of screening process to see if a certain kind of writing or a certain kind of the continuation of a character fits the kind of story we're telling. I understand that that's a little bit of controlling where the story goes, but I think that's why I said it's an unfinished sort of process that I'm still working on to find a way to filter the stories. But I believe it could be done. But back to the question, it's definitely not only for writers and screenplay and for storytellers. It's open for anybody that has an imagination.
So is this something I mean, a little bit more curious about process. So you go around and and share something about your characters, and then you kind of write down things that you hear from other people, or how this develop. I mean, and when does this start? When did this started in the past? So do you have the way or some kind of system that you collect all these things that you hear from other people?
Obviously, most of it is going to be online based. It's going to, I feel like it's going to function like, I don't want to say a festival, that would be too large, but it's going to function more like obviously we have to build like a following as well from creative mind. That's something we're already in the process of doing. And I believe that I have to establish myself as well, because if I and my colleague is going to be controlling this, I have to sort of prove myself to all the person that's going to be involved, any kind of contributor that's going to be involved, that's going to be following us, that they could trust us with their work. And the logistics of it is still a little bit fuzzy, but I believe that a lot of people want, if I obviously I'm aiming for like-minded people like myself. And I believe everybody has something they want to tell, some stories they want to contribute and anything like that. But the medium of actually finding that community of people that actually could stimulate you as well as, you want to be a part of it is pretty difficult, because everybody likes to do this stuff on their own, Yeah,
you mean like to have how to say that authorship
yeah,
on
yeah, exactly. So I think the technicality of it for how we're going to collect these stories, it's something that we're still trying to figure out. And I don't anticipate starting this project in the next month or two, because I have to sort of lock down the little details first before we could actually get to that point where we start collecting stories. It's going to start small. I understand that until, but I think I have to sort of interview for the job first, before I could start collecting information from people. So I feel like the first step is me putting my project out there, showing people or showing the people that are going to be involved in this that I am a storyteller as well. And I am just as vulnerable as you are in having my work criticized, having my work watched, and whatever, how you analyze my work. And then we could talk from there and say, okay, I could trust them. I could be involved with something that he wants to do. And there's no documents to be signed or anything like that. It's basically fun, and if anybody has a knowledge of how somewhat on how fan fiction works, it's this it's this program online where you take existing characters from popular films or programs that you've watched and use the characters to create your own story. It's not something like that. Obviously, we creating original characters and sort of developing it into a full-fledged story. We don't know how long it's going to be. It might as well be series or anything like that. But we do know. But what I do know is when the resolution of the actual story comes, collectively we're going to know when to stop. You know. So I feel like this is one of those tests of when writers say we wait for the characters to talk to us and take us through the journey, but this is I think this is an instance where our characters are talking to multiple storytellers that is just aiming for one goal, and when we all get to that goal together, we will all know together and say, okay, we've got into the end of the story. Something that I don't know. And it's actually fun that I don't even know about how it's going to end. I only know how it's going to begin.
So this is a kind of introduction in co-creation and the collaboration. So what does it mean for you? Like, how do you see yourself in a different project as co-creator? What do you think that a good co-creator have to, what kind of values co-creator should have? Can you explain a little bit more about that, in a way that when you are searching for somebody who would join your team, or you want to work with that people, what kind of values are you searching for?
Definitely no judgment when it comes to the skill set of somebody or how advanced they are in writing. Sometimes I've read some writings that are pretty bad when it comes to structurally or trying to develop a character, but there is something in it that you could see that there's life in the actual character if you just bring other perspective, other kind of eyeballs in it to look at it and say, oh wow, there's maybe just tweak some things here, tweak some things there. So in aspect of that, there's no judgment when it comes to skill level. And I think I love curiosity, you know, not necessarily passion. I think everybody says they have passion for something, but at some point passion sort of fades. But curiosity is something that I think if you're curious enough to ask a question that you really want to know the answer to, you could spend your whole life or your whole body of work trying to answer that question. And I think that's what writing is for me personally. I ask myself a question of what do I want to know about this character, and what do I know about what do I want to know about this subject, and it has to be a question that I'm curious enough to continue to explore every angles of the answers, and there's no ending to it, you know. And as soon as you find an answer to one, that answer sort of creates another question, which is human, you know, which is what humans are. We may be predictable, but at times we do things that are completely unpredictable, and that unpredictability sort of creates another question that sends us to a different journey, which is writing. Because to be a writer, you have to be able to kind of keep asking yourself questions, and that's where stories come from, you know, trying to be curious enough to want to know more about something, you know. It doesn't matter what kind of genre it is. It might be a question of love. Where did love come from? That's a huge question. The origin of life, that's a huge question. Where do we come from? That's a huge question. Why do people make decisions, and how come people make different decisions if they're put in similar situation? You know, what drives people? These are the makings of characters and stories. You know, so I think my point and I'm trying to make is somebody that is curious, people that love stories, people that have fun doing it, and not make it sort of a business, you know. So I think that would be some of the qualities that I'm looking for, because that's, like I said, like-minded people. That's some of the qualities that I could say that I would hope people see in me, you know.
How do you recognize that in another person? Is it some kind of gut feeling, or you wait for some time to see how that person behaves? Is it that like first impression when you meet somebody in person, and then you have like 10 minutes conversation, or is it something that developed through actual work? How do you see that another person has these the same values as you have, or as you search for?
I think for me, usually when I recognize that, it's the questions they ask. It's like sometimes it's so, you could tell, you know, when somebody's asking so much question about a certain project. It's the same thing when you see somebody in any kind of line of work. You see somebody that's just so not really into it. They're just doing it because it feels like an obligation or something. And there's the other side, when there's that fire in somebody's eyes when they're asking a question that they really want to know the answer to. But I think when it comes to storytelling, you could definitely distinguish between the people that really do it because they love it, and the people that do it because, I don't know, they have some idea of a future of being popular or something like that. So I think you would always tell the difference. And not that it's a bad thing to want to be popular with your writing and everything like that. That's fine with me. But I think being in love with stories is a 24 hours thing. You know, it just doesn't confine into an hour of you putting your day to write. You know, characters is something that you think about 24/7. You know, in the middle of the night, it keeps you up. That's the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning. Then it's something that frustrates you and everything like that. So I've had some of my friends that actually text me or call me in the middle of the night talking about freaking character. It's annoying, but a lot of times it makes me smile because I know they care about this story just as much as I do. If you could call me about in 2 a.m. in the midnight to ask me about something that we discussed earlier in the day. So I think little things like that kind of gives you the idea that, okay, this person is really thinking about this work as much as I do. And I think even when I'm shooting during productions, and that's something that I actually try to find from my crew. If they're calling me enough, if they're sending text enough, if they're emailing me enough to ask about certain things, it could be annoying sometimes, but at the same time, and to a larger degree, it's actually fun for me to actually know that, okay, I'm not the only one thinking about it so hard, you know. So then it makes me fall in love with the process. Then when I wake up the next morning, I'm like, okay, you know, I'm working with people that actually love these characters just as much as I do. It makes things a lot easier.
So if you could explain somebody who do not have that much experience with the storytelling and artistic processes, what makes a good story? Can you explain in a way that how do you recognize a good story? And if you teach storytelling in some kind of high school class or something like that, and some kid ask like, what is a good story? How we can know that something is a good story?
Okay, so usually those questions are kind of I always cringe when I'm asked those kind of stories, because it's based on perspective. What is I think there's a saying, one man's meat is another man's poison. So it's like, my idea of a good story personally is if the characters are realistic. What I mean by that is, if I could point to somebody and say, oh, okay, I know somebody that thinks like that, or that's a realistic response somebody would have to X situation, or if I'm having real feelings when I'm watching it and saying, damn, that shit is emotional. You know what I mean? It's like you tapping into the human the realism, how people would react to certain situation. I understand that in film, sometimes you have to dramatize certain things, blow it out of proportion and everything. And that's the fun of stories, because you could just put a microscope on something and just blow it and dramatize it in that way. But for me, I think when I write my story, especially with the dialogues, I try to sort of imagine what real people will say in certain situations, and the flow is just better. The reaction is just better. I don't like fairy tale endings, because Cinderella doesn't have to get the glass slippers at the end of the film, It's just boring to me. And I would prefer more realistic sort of endings. But again, like I said, all of this stuff is based on opinion. And this is my own sort of personal opinion when it comes to good storytelling. I think it has to do with well-developed characters that I could actually see where the decisions are coming from, even if it may be backstory. But I think there's hints that gives us, okay, this person is making this decision. We know where that decision came from, or why the person made this kind of decision. And sometimes you may not be able to fit everything into the story itself, especially with short films. But you could give us a little bit of something in the dialogue, or one or two pictures that tells us the origin of his decision, and dialogue and character development. Proper character development is always gold for me. So that's basically what I look for when I'm actually looking at a story or a film, and seeing if I could enjoy them in that way.
Do you think today, when almost every person has a camera in a pocket, do you think that helps production and makes that easier? The production available to for every person to contribute to telling stories and filmmaking. And how do you see this? For example, like maybe 50 years ago, this wasn't really possible, like to be involved in creating so much content online and everywhere. How do you see this?
I think like every other thing is a double-edged sword, honestly. I'm not necessarily I'm not a social media person, or I really don't go online that much to look at this stuff. But I think information is good. I think the fact that everybody has access to sort of tell their own story is awesome. And I've seen some fantastic projects. Even I watch a lot of short films on Vimeo and on YouTube. Sometimes I just go around browsing for that stuff. And sometimes I try to use them for inspiration, just to kind of see, okay, what is going on out there? What kind of story do people like these days? But I think in a way, it doesn't allow people to work for the story anymore, because they could just hop on and, look for something, then replicate it. I know it's hard to come, it's difficult for people to come up with original stories these days, even for myself. But I usually try to look for original stories from people and not try to tell me a version of something that I've seen before. It's quite difficult. That's why I say it's a double-edged sword. It could help, but broadly speaking, it's just too many information, too much information that people do not really necessarily have to work that hard to get information now. I mean, you could be anything you want to be now. If I want to be a bloody heart surgeon, I could hop online and find a video of somebody doing something, and it's just way too many information. Everybody could be whatever they want to be, or a version of what they think they want to be, by just hopping online and finding something about it. You don't have to really work that much anymore to figure out things. And for me, I think that's the thing that I love in my process about writing, the research part. Opening a book, reading or short stories, things like that, and sort of seeing the language that all these great writers, how they develop characters, how they use their dialogue to kind of reveal things. I think very limited writers actually do that now, where they try to figure out things opposed to replicating things. It's nothing wrong with replicating things, but do the hard work of making it unique in your own way. So information is good, that's fine, but sometimes it's much fun, at least for me, to look for the information myself, in terms of trying to understand the information, where it originates from, watching classic movies and trying to see how it first began, then seeing how everything sort of developed until now. And that's why I've always gone back to the whole idea. I think when it comes to writing, usually when people put out a full feature or a couple of shorts, they sort of figure that they figured it out, because maybe they have a couple of festival awards and they figured it out, and figure the whole Da Vinci Code when it comes to writing. But I've never actually called myself a writer. Maybe in formality, in the credit of the films, that's fine. But I've always called myself a storyteller, because I feel like I'm not worthy enough to take that or experienced enough to call myself a writer. It's just so big of a word that I feel like it's taken for granted. Anybody that puts a pen and the paper or write a 7-page script that might be remotely good, they like to call themselves a writer, and that's fine. But for me, I've written a couple of short stories, a few features, but I'm not a writer. I don't think, just by evaluating myself and sort of looking at my project and looking at the development of how far I've gone with how I tell stories, I know personally that I'm not there yet to call myself, I'm a writer kind of thing. But I will tell you for sure that I am a storyteller, and again, it sort of circles back to the interactive storytelling. That's why I say I want storytellers. I want people that has the imagination to kind of just play around with characters, you know what I mean? And because at some point we were all storytellers when we were a kid, you know, and I think growing up, we sort of get less and less creative and try to do things, try to be an adult in a way. So we forget about the beauty about being a kid, and just our imagination is just free and there's no mistake, you know. We don't know that much information to stuff our character in this, in what it means to be an adult, you know. I don't know if you get me. It's a little, that idea is a little bit fuzzy in my head, but I know what I'm thinking.
So you mean like we fill ourselves with so many things that we think we have to do, we have to behave.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, pretty much. I think sometimes in a way I find myself contradicting myself when I say I write my characters to be very much realistic. And then on the other hand, I say, be a kid and just, you do no wrong with your character. Just go where the character takes you. It might be silly, it might be, but I would say I lean towards just being a kid and just playing around with your characters and just letting them go free. Let them do what they have to do to get to the resolution, that, because that's how a kid really thinks, you know. When you were a kid playing with your dolls, some of the ridiculous things you do with the dolls is just, it's just crazy, but it's fun, you know. And I think that's how I see stories, and that's how even now when I write stories, that's how I sort of play around with them, you know, naive in a way, until the world sort of shapes them, or the world that we create shapes them and gives them knowledge to continue. You know, they find the information themselves opposed to being fed the information. I guess that's a better way to put it.
so what came to my mind is kind of a paradoxical situation that when we were a kid, we wanted to be adult, and now we kind of want to be a kid
Okay.
again.
Exactly. Circle of life.
So, can you say a little bit about Paradox Films and some ideas behind the name, and something that you would like to share?
Mhm.
How? So, when what do you want other people? What kind of impression you would like they have when they hear about Paradox Films?
The origin of Paradox for me comes, I think, it comes to the my first thought was I wanted to have a place where, well, let me go way back actually. Um, when I first made one of my major films, which was For Our Sins, I took my cast and crew to the Met Museum because I wanted to replicate um, one of the Rembrandt sort of style of painting in the film. I wanted to use that the lighting technique and just sort of find a way to replicate that sort of mood in film. And since film is just a collection of still image to form uh, motion, I just had an idea that why is it that I cannot bring in maybe a photographer or a painter or anybody in a different field of art. We all in the same umbrella, and they would look at an image in their own unique way. But I think when it comes to film, everything is just sort of role based, where a cinematographer has his job, which rightfully so, and art director, writer, director, and everybody like that. But we're living out this entire field of people that may not necessarily be directly involved with film, but they have their own creative take in certain aspects as well. So Paradox is sort of a place where I could consult with a critical thinker or an abstract artist or somebody that could take a look at the same picture or the same scene or the same location and tell me something different, you know. So Paradox is I just, where that came from was I wanted to collaborate with unlike-minded people, so to speak, that do not think the way I think, but we could combine our thinking and create something unique, you know, because I think all filmmakers, in a way, we all swimming in the same pool. We've read the same books, we've watched almost the same films, we know all the theories and all of the, you know, all the techniques. So if I communicate with another film person or another writer or another storyteller, we're probably going to understand each other and speak the same language. When we talk about angles and all of that stuff, we probably most likely going to speak the same language. And if we sort of clear the dust out a little bit, we will arrive at the same solution. It's inevitable, you know, maybe slightly different here and there. But imagine if you bring a painter in the picture or an abstract artist or just somebody different that has nothing to do with film, and put them in the mix. Will they see a different perspective? In my way, that's how I feel like film could reach a unique sort of perspective if I utilize all these different minds. They're artists as well, you know. Maybe their art does not necessarily move just as ours does, but they know how to think in an artistic way. You know, they know how to see things in a different perspective, something that I'm probably not going to see, you know. So I think the challenge is how to bring all of this together and make it one. You know, that for me is where the idea of Paradox came from. You know, obviously there's more to that story, but I think that was my primary thinking when it comes to a hub, a community where free thinkers of all kinds could create one work.
It's almost like you are speaking about chemistry, and
It might as well be. You know, I think that's the fun thing about stories, about trying to figure it out, trying to kind of find a sweet spot. You know, that's why I love stories. That's why I love telling, writing this stuff, because if you look at it as just playing around with characters and playing God, you miss the whole point of it, you know. Especially when it comes to you trying to shoot it. I feel like it's putting a puzzle together, figuring out these characters, figuring out, you know, how they function in this world that you've built for them. Obviously, I'm not an expert at this, but this is my own perspective, and this is what keeps me curious enough to want to know more about it. Which goes back to my point, you know, find a question that you're curious enough about that you could enjoy spending your whole life trying to answer it. So this is why I feel like I'm always going to enjoy what I do, you know, and I'm always going to be curious about it, because even when I think I find an answer, that answer is going to lead to more questions, which is good for me, which gives me more work to do and keeps me in the business, I suppose. So that's my take on that.
Is there any living artist that you really admire?
Let me think. Let's get back to that question. But there's a lot of films that I actually and a lot of artists that I actually look at their work and say, damn, I love the way this person does what he does. Uh,
Do you feel like you see the work and then you feel like, oh, I want to have a conversation with this person?
I mean, I mean, like obviously Quentin Tarantino, the way he writes dialogue, it's just it gives me goosebumps anytime I watch his films. Aaron Sorkin, he did films like Few Good Men. The way he writes his dialogue is it's just like listening to music. I think those are the few when it comes to those are the two people when it comes to writing dialogue that I really enjoy, and I always go back to almost always go back to when it comes to when I want to get inspired by something. I sort of pick up their script and sort of read how the flow of it goes. It inspires me. I don't try to replicate it in any way. It just makes me, it just puts me in a place where I say, okay, this is how dialogue should be written. You know what I mean? But these people are gods when it comes to they spend decades or years trying to figure this stuff out. Those are writers, you know. Those are the people that I consider writers when it comes to film. And but I think one of the things that I would say is it's not necessarily about names for me when it comes to people that I admire. It's more about films. If they're, it's like I get towards, if I watch the full body of work, like the whole film, it's a lot of people involved that brought up this whole concept, you know. So I think for films, there's certain films that I've watched like maybe 50 times, and every time I watch it, it feels new to me. It still feels great. It feels like I'm watching it for the first time, because every time I watch it, I see something new. I learn something new, even though I know it word for word, the dialogue and everything. But it just puts me in a place where I say, okay, this is a perfectly made film right here. It makes me feel everything I want to feel. I'm connected to the characters in so many ways. And those kind of film, I try to replicate those kind of feeling in my own films. It's difficult to do, but it makes me happy that I could actually go back to these films and learn something, you know. Mm-hmm. And one of it, and on top of my list, is City of God. That's a fantastic film in every way, and that film has everything that I want my film to have that I've not accomplished in any way, but that's my goal. And Bicycle Thief, that's an amazing film as well. These are part of my top 5 films. Then you have Sunset Boulevard. That's just a beautiful classic. And I think with Sunset Boulevard, I look at the acting in that one, super dramatic, but it makes me happy every time I watch that film. And it just takes me back to what films should be like, you know, the experience of watching cinema should be like, you know. And there's a few others, but I don't want to take your time in doing it.
So what kind of feeling is that? Is it, I believe it is a really complex experience, but when you say this is the film that the feeling I would like to kind of replicate, what kind of feeling is that? Can you explain? Okay. Can you put it in a words?
Okay, I'll use the example of City of God, for instance, which a film that I've watched like maybe 50 times already. You really get invested in all these characters, you know. It's real. It feels like it feels like you're watching a documentary, but at the same time, it obviously is fiction. The world just feels authentic, which I'm certain it is. The characters just, they feel well developed, and there's so many characters in the film, but all of them had a role to play to move the story forward. It's very I don't even understand the dialogue because it's a Brazilian film. The language is Portuguese, so I read most the subtitles. But I think that's the beautiful part about it for me. The fact that I don't even understand half of what they're saying, but I can still follow the characters. I still understand. It's just like watching silent film. You know, I know it doesn't connect. It's reminiscent of silent film in a way where you don't know what the hell they're doing. You know, I mean, what the hell they're saying, but you can still follow the action because the actors just they lead you there. You know, City of God is one of those films that it feels like you're part of these characters because they put you right in the middle of this world that if it just feels real, you know.
So you kind of feel I want to live in this film, right?
Yeah. I
I
mean,
want to enter there.
when it comes to City of God, I mean, the world is a little bit harsh, but it's like if I could be like a fly in the wall and just experiencing everything that was going on, it'd be beautiful, you know. It's just even the villain in the film, you feel connected to him because you know his purpose, you know his struggle, you know why he's doing what he's doing, you know. I think for me, the best characters in stories is usually the villain. They're the most interesting characters, if you ask me. They're the most complex characters because they do all these bad things, and their reasons are even more authentic than the protagonist, which is the hero, because the hero is just a hero. He wants to save the day, you know. It's just a moral compass that a hero has. He just wants to save the day, get the girl. But a villain just wants to destroy the whole bloody thing. Then you're asking the question, why does he hate the world so much that he wants? Then you have to go back to his origin. Then sometimes you feel so guilty inside because he has such logical reason why he want to destroy everything, and you agree with him. But
you kind of support him.
exactly. So I think the best characters to write for me are villains. And when it comes to City of God, they did that so well that half the time I don't even care about the hero. I don't even think there's a hero in City of God. I have to watch it again.
I don't care for the hero.
So that film is just like that for me. It just gives me the goosebumps because it's a long film, but every minute is just beautiful. Every minute is just well thought of, and yeah,
so hero is there like a furniture.
Exactly.
it has to be there, but who cares?
Exactly. I feel like they just put the hero there just because that a film has to have a hero and a villain, but you really don't. You really don't follow him. so that's
okay. So we are almost came to an end of this conversation. So for last question, I would like to ask you: do you, in your everyday life, do you have experiences like, this should be part of some some of my films? How do you collect these experiences in everyday life? And do you are you inspired by your everyday life as well?
Yeah. Well, I'm inspired by real people. You know, sometimes I just walk around. I like to observe. You know, sometimes I go to a coffee shop and I'm having breakfast. I'm having coffee, and I just like to look at people. Just there's this thing that back in college, me and a friend of mine, we stay like where our lab is, editing lab. When we take a break, we just look down at sort of lobby, cafeteria area where people are just walking, and you don't know what people are just always talking, and everything is just so synchronized. Then we sort of try to make dialogue on what they're thinking and what they're saying. But that's just a side note. But my point is, I think I'm inspired by people. Why do people do what they do? Why do people sort of confine themselves in this? How can I put it? It's like people have become so predictable in a way where humans are sort of like machines now, where we know what we're expected to do, and sometimes people do not question it. They just go along with it, and that makes for a good film as well. But it's like trying to get into people's head and asking the question, why did they do what they do? Why do they think what they think? You know,
why they are so boring.
exactly. Exactly. And I mean, obviously, if you dig deep at people's, and that's the fascination with films, is like what you see is not necessarily what you get. You know, when you look at somebody, you think you figured them out, but then when you dig deeper, then you start seeing this person is
Oh, this is psycho. This is psycho.
yeah. This is where stories come from, the curiosity to want to ask the more question about the obvious. Yeah, so like why do refugees cross the Mediterranean to go to Europe? You know, knowing that there's a possibility, that's a huge possibility that they're going to die. You know, what, like we could talk about, you know, what made them do it, like hunger and war and all of this stuff. But that's the bigger reasons. But when you bring everything, simplify it, and just ask the, you know, just like why, you know, aside from that, knowing that you may not make it. Why do you do it? Why does a father wake up 4 a.m. in the morning every day like clockwork to do 3 jobs? You know, it's just questions that are just so human to me, that I want to know the reason why. You know, what inspires people to do what they do, you know? Why do sometimes some people jump in front of a bullet to save someone? Like, what goes into your mind knowing that you're going to die when you do that? You know, some of the little questions that these are the questions that I ask myself, no matter how ridiculous some of these questions actually sound, that inspires me to write some of the characters that I write. And some of the characters that I write is just memories. A lot of it is just dreams, you know, that I have. Then I wake up in the middle of the night and just start developing that character. Sometimes it's just as crazy out. I would say 70% of the stories that I write comes from my dreams, honestly, as crazy as that might sound. But I have a lot of nightmares. And I've gotten to a point where I actually enjoy them. You know, I actually enjoy having nightmares, because this is what my stories are made of. You know, it's not gonna kill me or anything like that. I'm in it, and they're interesting, and most of them do not make any sense. But that's where I come in as a storyteller to make them make sense, you know, and put some narrative behind them, you know, and that's the fun part about it for me, at least. But again, if you ask me where my inspiration comes from everywhere. You know, it might be a word you've heard, or It might be a quote. It might be a painting you see. It might be you just standing and making your mind wander, a memory. Uh, a breeze blowing through a tree or something like that brings back a smell, something like that. Then you put a character behind it. You know, this is the fun of telling a story, that no matter how ridiculous it sounds or it looks like in your head, as soon as you get to the white pages and start putting them together, these characters, these things sort of develop themselves. You know, you start putting words into this character's mouth, then at some point they're going to start talking back. As a saying that might sound, I think any storyteller could relate to this, you know. So talking to yourself sometimes isn't so bad because somebody's always going to talk back. And I have to say, I enjoy spending that kind of quality time with my characters and talking to them and sort of living in their own world and getting inspired and just, you know, just having coffee with them sometimes it's nice, you know. So I think as a storyteller or a writer, when you think like you're not always alone, you know, when you think you're alone, you're not necessarily alone. I don't know how to put that, but I'm really never alone when even though nobody's in the room, because my imagination and it's always functioning. There's always a character sitting down in the corner, trying to figure out his story with me, or trying to feed me something to do. I've been having that experience since the past month because I'm working on a story right now, which probably I'm going to finish today. And last night, the dots just sort of came together, and all it took was just one picture, you know, and it just sort of came all together. Everything just sort of came together, and this is something this is an inspiration as well, you know. So I think this is where inspiration comes from everywhere. You just got to be open-minded enough to actually welcome them and receive it and, you know, follow through with them. Sometimes they come, then they're just gonna pass you by, you know, because you're not open enough to, or you think they're foolish enough to actually be good, you know.
So I would add one more question. How old were you when you know that you are storyteller? Like, is there some kind of decision, or did you naturally have that feeling that this is something that that is a big part of your identity?
No, actually, to be honest, I'm not. I wasn't one of those people that as beautiful as that may sound. If I say I was 9 or 4 when I started writing, or that could have been a nice story, but no, the family that I grew up in, I'm African, so Nigerian to be specific. Tradition was a little bit different when I was younger. When it comes to, there's only 3 things you could possibly do, or your parents expect you to do, which was something that I was sort of focused on, either a doctor, an engineer, or I think a lawyer. Those were the top. So those were something that it was either one of those that I was sort of gunning for. But when I got into college and my freshman year, my whole intention was to go into pre-med, and that was what I studied. That was the classes that I took. But then I did not enjoy it. Then I had to wear, you know, I knew that I had to wear a suit every day to work. And it just wasn't something that was appealing to me, you know. But one thing that I knew that was consistent all my life was that I spent hours. I went to bed probably like 3 a.m. since when I was since like as early in my life as I could remember. I had no bedtime or anything like that. So I think my parents just gave me free reign to watch TV till my eyeballs kind of were hurting. So I watched a lot of films, a lot of TV, you know. But that was the thing. But I never knew that I was going to be involved in anything storytelling or film or anything like that. I just knew one thing. I love watching film. I love watching uh, midnight whatever. You know, as long as the TV was on, I'm watching it. And that was the one thing that I knew that was consistent in my life, that did not change, that I did not think twice about. I did it in high school. I did it in college. I'm still doing it right now when I watch film till the middle of the night. I enjoy it. Why not do it for a living? So that's how sort of I started getting interested in it. But if you want to go deeper, I started getting curious about how, I think the first film, the first moment that I knew that I was curious enough to actually want to get into it, surprisingly, was the time I watched Troy, the one with Brad Pitt. It's not necessarily a classic. You would think it's a classic movie that sort of inspired me, but no, it was the first time that I saw all these soldiers, just all this Greek soldiers and the Trojan soldiers just clashing. I was like, how did the director make all these thousands of people do that? Then I was like, okay, I got to find out how this works. Then obviously, I started kind of from then on. That actually was the first time I was curious about how film were made. Prior to that time, it did not really matter. I was just enjoying the Rambo, Commando, and all of those films, Chuck Norris, and all of those action films. I enjoyed them. I did not ask any question. I just wanted to watch them and have fun. But that was the first time that I was curious enough to actually ask myself, how did they control all these people to do what they wanted to do? Then I found out that, hey, there's a behind the scenes footage.
Even more people.
Exactly. Then I started trying to kind of piece all of this stuff together. Then usually when I watch a film, I look for behind the scenes up how they do it, how film, behind the scenes sort of footage. Then I started watching how films are made. Then it starts getting a little interesting. It ruins film for you in a way. It sort of ruined film for me in a way, because now it's like, God damn it, this shit wasn't real. But then it was fun to know that people are actually controlling this stuff. I know now that I say it out loud, it sounds a little childish, but that's what story is. It should be childish. Your imagination should go back to when you were 5 and curious enough to give your all these dolls names and characters and create the stories in your head. Now, obviously, when I started writing, now I sort of faced another challenge, and that, which is something that I'm still going through, is what kind of stories do I want to tell, and do I want to tell stories that I loved when I was a kid, like, which is the action films, which I still love, or do I want to tell a story like Titanic, where I make people cry in the end, or Notebook, or the Schindler's List type of story, big stories? Do I want to tell stories that I'm more familiar with, but do I really enjoy that kind of stories? So this is where you start sort of trying to find out what kind of writer or what kind of storyteller that you are,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I am still in the process right now where I'm trying to realize that, what kind of films do I like to tell?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of stories do I want to write, that I will invest all this time trying to trying to sit down on my computer and talk to these characters, and I think to a degree, I would say I'm figuring it out, and it makes me happy that now I'm bringing all these genres and sort of shrinking them into, okay, this is the kind of stories that I want to tell. But I'm still in the process of actually doing that. But I know as I move forward, every film that I write is a step towards me trying to know what kind of storyteller that I am. So I think the origin of all of that sort of brought me here. It's been a nice journey so far. I'm enjoying it.
I would like to really thank you for contributing to my podcast and this to really asking these questions about thinking about artistic processes and really why does one person even want to be an artist. Doesn't matter is it a filmmaker or painter or a musician. I hope people who would listen this would kind of understand that intention and that curiosity about world and experiences. So
absolutely.
thank you one more time.
Thanks for having me.